Right, so as many commentators have been opining upon, Labour have announced an arms sale ban to Israel. Except, of course, they haven't really. It isn't much of a ban when only 8.2% of all arms export licences from the UK to Israel have actually been stopped. And there's no shortage of videos right now condemning that rightfully as pathetic, as a gesture, as a hopeful move to take the heat off Starmer and co. over their pro-Israel positioning and hopefully placate many of their critics. I suggest the opposite to some extent is what they've actually achieved. It's backfiring for going nowhere near far enough. What I've not seen a lot of is people drilling into Foreign Secretary David Lammy's justifications for not going further. Because actually we need to scratch past the surface story of the fake arms sale ban, and it is fake, it's not a ban, it's a gesture, because David Lammy gave so much more away than just that. If that's all you took away from his speech in Parliament, if that's as much as the videos you might have watched covered, then you've missed some crucial giveaways on the thinking of Starmer's Labour and its attitude to ongoing support and arming of Israel, despite everything we've borne witness to for the last 11 months since the night of October 7th, and the insight into how Israel treats Palestinians going back even further than that. And it says Labour have got no intention of shifting.
The Foreign Secretary will be very well aware of the decisions made by the ICJ and the ICC. He'll also be very well aware that the world has condemned Israel for its illegal occupation of the West Bank, the settlement policy, and the killing of 40,000 people in Gaza. The suspension of some arms contracts, could he explain what effect that will actually make on Israel's ability to continue the bombardment of Gaza, or will it continue unabated? And will he also explain what role, legally or otherwise, Britain has played in overflying Gaza with surveillance aircraft and the use of RAF akrotiri as a staging point for aircraft going to Israel, which many people believe are carrying weapons that are used to bomb Gaza?
Foreign Secretary.
I know that the Right Honourable Gentleman is informed on many aspects of these issues. He must know that our exports to Israel amount to about 1%. And in fact, it is the United States and Germany and others that are much more engaged in the selling of arms to Israel. So when he asks me the effect, he can draw his own conclusions in relation to that. I am very comfortable with the support that we give to Israel, and I won't comment on operational issues as he would expect from this dispatch box.
Right, so that was a critical moment there in the questioning of Foreign Secretary David Lammy following his speech, his announcement yesterday in the House of Commons that the UK was going to end 30 arms export licences out of the 350 of them we currently have with Israel. Jeremy Corbyn there posed two crucial questions and David Lammy dodged them both. Corbyn first asked what difference would it make to end these licences, just these 30, and Lammy said, well, what we supply to Israel here in the UK amounts to about 1% of all the arms they get, and that Corbyn should draw his own conclusions from that. I suppose that can quite easily be extended to the rest of us therefore then, can't it? We supply 1% and Lammy still can't bring himself to end all of that 1% is one way of looking at that. I'll come back to that point in a moment though. But Lammy claims he's taken on board advice he's been given, legal advice. Well, how about you publish that advice then, Dave? You demanded David Cameron, your predecessor in your role, publish the legal advice he'd received on arms sales to Israel. So why won't you do that now yourself then, Dave? All he's told us is that parts for F-16 jets and parts for helicopters and drones, all stuff Lammy claims could be used in violation of international humanitarian law, and we can all understand how that could be the case, have been stopped from being exported to Israel. But completely undermining that is the fact that parts for the top-of-the-line F-35 jets that are produced here in the UK will not be banned at all. And there was a story briefly going around, I presume to be unverified, hence why it seemed to have disappeared, that these licences that have been stopped may have been due to expire shortly, and that perhaps that is why they were chosen to be stopped as even more of a token gesture. That would have been a scandal. Certainly with the F-35 jet parts still being exported. It ends up being quite believable, doesn't it? But for now, we can only ponder on that and see if that does end up ever being verified or whether it was a complete hoax. What exactly each of those 30 export licenses are, it would be useful to know, since we can then compare those to the fact that F-35 parts are still being traded. And that does bring me back to that point on us only supplying 1% of all Israeli arms and not stopping even that minuscule, seemingly, amount in the grand scheme of Israel armaments. The easy thing to say on that is that it will make no difference. And certainly that is what Lammy both wanted us to think watching, and the conclusion he clearly wanted Jeremy Corbyn to reach too. But Corbyn is an astute sort. I'm sure he likely came to the same or similar conclusion that I did, which is whatever that 1% is, clearly it must be a very, very important 1% for it to have to continue to be traded. And these F-35 parts come back to the story once again, because components for these jets are produced by a group of different countries, making different parts for them. And one part that is unique to this country, which I'm sure can't possibly be used to violate international humanitarian laws, are the bomb release cradles for these jets, produced in the L3 Harris factory in Brighton. Now, Reuters are reporting that these parts will still not be sold directly to Israel, but that it is not possible to suspend these parts without prejudicing the global production program for F-35s. This also makes no sense. It seems to just be an excuse that we won't send them directly to Israel, but, well, we can't do anything about them maybe getting there in a roundabout kind of way if we send these parts to someone else first, who also happen to be making F-35 parts. They might be for another country, though. Sorry, we just can't stop it. Sorry, wrong, bit of hand-wringing. If other countries want to continue to produce these jets for other nations, tell them they can't have the parts as long as they are destined for Israel along the supply chain. If the jets are going to be for another nation that we don't have an issue with supplying the parts for, that's fine. But if the jets are intended for Israel, sorry, these parts are not going to be able to be used for that contract. Be leaders on this. Lead the way. Say no. Instead, Labour are just too weak to be global leaders, even over something like F-35 jet manufacture. Or rather, they just don't want to be. If they did, they'd ban all arms sales to Israel, of course, wouldn't they? All export licenses, all of that 1%. Ban all the export licenses, as other countries have already done. They have been leaders on this. We have not been. All of this is part of what is called the 1% fallacy. Oh, we only supply 1%. We don't make a difference, really. Except the reality is that 1% you do produce, nobody else does. So it might only seem like a very small amount, a very small issue, but actually it's a completely and totally critical one, and to stop it would actually make one hell of a lot of difference. The only example I can give here is over those F-35 parts licenses, because that's as much clarity and information as we've been given. But equally, we know Lammy is continuing 320 other arms export licenses, and we don't produce that many parts for F-35s. So what is that all about then? Corbyn's other question covers a matter I've raised before in other videos and has been virtually exclusively documented by the excellent Declassified UK. And this was concerning the role of RAF Akrotiri on Cyprus, a UK airbase being used as a staging ground for the UK, obviously, who, amongst other things, have launched attacks on the Houthis in Yemen from there to try and end their blockade of the Red Sea, and attacks on shipping to no avail, but also for US forces, US aircraft, many flights of whom have been tracked flying into and out of Israel, Tel Aviv, presumably carrying much of the weaponry being supplied to Israel by the US and the UK, which in turn is being used against the people of Gaza as genocide and ethnic cleansing continues, and continues to be enabled by states aiding and abetting them. Massive questions are left unanswered. Corbyn tried to get some. Lammy hid behind national security. The old line of not being able to comment on operational issues being used to cover this up. Well, what operational issues, though? What operational issues are we being involved in here? What are you conducting? Is the RAF active in Israel and you're not telling us? Well, again, that has also been alleged. But frankly, knowing what is going on in Israel and Gaza, and knowing the flights that have been going in and out of Israel from Akrotiri, because flight plans and flight logs are a matter of public record, be they military flights or not, they have to be, so as to not disturb commercial flights, it's not difficult for people to draw their own conclusions, as Lammy asked us to do, when the context also happens to be provided, though. The caginess of the government to admit what they are up to, well, it only adds to people's suspicions, doesn't it? But nothing quite screams you're guilty of enabling genocide quite like local Cypriots organising a protest not just for Gaza, but organising it outside the gates of RAF Akrotiri itself. They know better probably than anyone what their island is being used as a staging ground for, after all. So far, we've established from Lammy's answers to Corbyn are that this ban is not really a ban, it's optics, that the 1% we supply to Israel by way of arms is clearly too critical in reality to be totally ended, rather than so unimportant as to not really matter, and that this Labour government, just like the last Tory government, isn't going to say a dicky bird about the goings-on in and out of RAF Akrotiri. Nothing there to raise suspicions at all, is there? A 10% ban on arms sales to Israel is in no way reassuring that we're doing enough. Suspended Labour MP Afsana Begum also put this point to David Lammy herself in another question, and Lammy made mention of saying, well, why would we stop selling one of our closest allies the likes of helmets or goggles? Well, they might be one of your closest allies, Dave. You've had enough in the way of donations from pro-Israel sources, after all, but plenty of British people are viscerally disgusted at the concept of them being in any way an ally committing genocide as they are. And if all you're selling them is actually stuff like helmets and goggles, why won't you just tell us what those licenses are then, specifically relating to these helmets and goggles? After all, a senior Foreign Office diplomat resigned over all of this, Mark Smith. I wonder what he's made of this arms sales fake ban. It's not like Lammy listened to him before he resigned, after all, when he was raising concerns. Get all the details of that story, which leads up to Lammy's speech, and how we're at this point now with the Foreign Office, how seriously the Foreign Office took Mark Smith's concerns before now. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.